Realize people joining us now in the 7 o'clock hour, 8 o'clock hour on the East Coast have no knowledge of this whatever. You didn't know that today was the day the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. Of course, we don't have a Bill of Rights anymore. Congress can just shred them and micturate on them because Lindsey Graham, editorialist at the National Review Online, and other senators say they can. Well, we have one Constitution for war, one Bill of Rights for war, and one Bill of Rights for when we're not at war, according to these madmen. Well, back in the day, in the 1780s, after the Constitution was ratified against the wishes of some people like Patrick Henry, there is a reason why we have a Bill of Rights. It's because men like Patrick Henry were scared to death. They were mortified of this new federal government. And they had every right to be and every reason to be. And I would suspect that if they were around today, they would probably either start a rebellion or they would move elsewhere. So a brief recap, that's the story of the Bill of Rights. Most people don't know that it was Patrick Henry, yes, the liberty or death Patrick Henry, who would not rest until a Bill of Rights amendments were added to the U.S. Constitution. This is part of that story from a book written in 1890 by Moses Coit Tyler called American Statesman Patrick Henry. I just want to read you a brief excerpt of this to show you one man's dedication. And by the way, Patrick Henry, as I said earlier, received no earthly compensation for his efforts on your behalf. But just keep ignoring him and his efforts and what they were intended to secure, and all will be right with the world, right? Right. To the book. Thus, about the end of June 1788, there came down upon the fierce political strife in Virginia a lull, which lasted until the 20th of October, at which time the legislature assembled for its annual autumnal session. Meantime, however, the Convention of New York had adopted the Constitution, but after a most bitter fight, and by a majority of only 3 votes, and only in consequence of the pledge that every possible effort should be made to obtain speedily those great amendments that were at last called for by a determined public demand. One of the efforts contemplated by the New York Convention took the form of a circular letter to the governors of the several states, urging, almost pathetically, that effectual measures be immediately taken for calling a convention to propose those amendments which are necessary for allaying the apprehensions and discontents then so prevalent. This circular letter rekindled, as James Madison then wrote to Thomas Jefferson, an ardor among the opponents of the federal Constitution for an immediate revision of it by another general convention. Mr. Patrick Henry and his friends in Virginia enter with great zeal into the scheme. In a letter written by Washington nearly a month before the meeting of the legislature, it is plainly indicated that his mind was then grievously burdened by the anxieties of the situation, and that he was disposed to put the very worst construction upon the expected conduct of Patrick Henry and his party in the approaching session. No sooner had the assembly met than Patrick Henry's ascendancy became apparent. His sway over that body was such that it was described as omnipotent. And by the time the session had been in progress not quite a month, Washington informed Madison that the accounts from Richmond were very unpropitious to federal measures. In one word, he added, it is said that the edicts of Mr. Henry are enregistered with less opposition in the Virginia Assembly than those of the Grand Monarch by his parliaments. He has only to say, let this be law, and it is law. Within 10 days from the opening of the session, the House showed its sensitive response to Patrick Henry's leadership by adopting a series of resolutions, the chief purpose of which was to ask the new Congress to call immediately a national convention for proposing to the states the required amendments. In the debate on the subject, he is said to have declared, quote, that he should oppose every measure tending to the organization of the government unless accompanied with measures for the amendment of the Constitution, end quote. So what did we just learn? We just learned that the great liberty or death patriot that everyone loves to run around and quote wasn't a fan of this Constitution, wasn't a fan of James Madison, was suspicious of George Washington because he supported the Constitution. And Mr. Henry had good reason because he said he believed, and he was proven correct, And if you unleash this federal monster on the unsuspecting peoples of Virginia, New York, and elsewhere, then it will grow in size and stature until it ultimately leads to our political ruin. I'd say here in 2011, we're about 100 years beyond political ruin. Now we have a Bill of Rights that is we don't even have a head fake towards it by those in power. They micturate upon it, they shred it, they mock it, they impugn it, they make fun of it. And all the while they're doing this, all the while they're ignoring it, all the while they're perverting it for their own military purposes, they pretend to be friends of it. Oh, the Constitution was never a suicide pact. With Lindsey Graham, John McCain, Kelly Ayotte, the rest of those clowns writing laws about it and ignoring it, oh yeah, it's a suicide pact. Suicide for liberty. Your civil liberties. Because as we should have learned, civil liberties are not just to be enforced, not just to be cherished today, not just to be cherished tomorrow, not just to be cherished and defended when we are at peace, but how about when we're at war? What, we just lose all our liberties because we're at war? Here's a quotation from Ex parte Milligan, 1866. The Constitution of this is a Supreme Court case, by the way, which was waged about suspending habeas corpus during Mr. Lincoln's War of Northern Aggression. Quote, the Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and for people, equally in war and peace. And it covers with its shield of protection all classes of men at all times and under all circumstances. No doctrine involving more pernicious consequences was ever invented by the wit of men that any of its great provisions can be suspended during any of the great exigencies of government. Will anyone talk about civil liberties? Will any questions be asked about civil liberties of the Republican candidates tonight? I doubt it. Will Congressman Paul sneak in a couple of shots for the Bill of Rights and for those liberties? Probably. Will they be laughed at? Will Rudy Giuliani be sitting on his couch at home going, probably. Will the American sheeple care? Probably not. As our mass democracy approaches rapidly that station which the people of Germany and Italy and other countries approached in the late 1930s, who is it that's going to stand up and say, no, consider your way, this is wrong? Well, I don't believe it'll be Mr. Gingrich. I do not believe it'll be Mr. Romney. Not because I believe them to be dishonest, because I believe them to not be informed. This is what we ought to be asking our presidential candidates. What are you going to do to stop this train?